Rosemary, one of the things that you mentioned in the book is the three types of dreams that we have. I think a lot of people just generalize a dream is a dream is a dream. It's weird, I forget it or I remember it. But you mentioned there's actually three types, and I'm hoping that you can explain to our audience a little bit of what that is. There's the personal level, there's the archetypal level, and then there is the transpersonal level.
And a single dream may have all three of those aspects in it, because dreams are often like onions. They have layers and layers and layers to them, and they mean different things in different areas of life. Most of our dreams, as I mentioned, are personal. They deal with situations in daily life, our stresses, our anxieties, how we're facing crises. When we come upon important crossroads in life or big decision, dreams will address those and our concerns around those issues. So that's the personal level. And they will take content from daily life, the things you did yesterday, the movie you saw last night, the people you work with, your friends and family, almost like drawing from a photographic album of your life.
There are two types of dreams we encounter in All the Pretty Horses. Over the course of the book, we are introduced to dreams about aspirations and finding a meaning in life, as well as dreams that occur in the character's sleep. There are many examples of dreams in All the Pretty Horses. In the beginning of the book, we are introduced to John Grady, a teen from Texas who dreams of living life on a ranch and riding horses in Mexico. John Grady views Mexico as an ideal world, a place where he can find his own paradise. In this sense, his dreams symbolize his goals and meaning in life, which he believes he can find in Mexico. Without his dreams of Mexico, John Grady would have no sense of purpose in life, and because of this, we know that his dreams are his source of meaning. John Grady describes Mexico as, quote, El Dorado, quote, which is a mythical land of gold and prosperity. John Grady pictures Mexico as his own El Dorado because it is where he can find prosperity and live out his dreams of riding horses. On their way to Mexico, John Grady and Rollins find a small town comprised of mud huts. They stumble upon two young girls who summon a man from their house. The man offered them a meal and a place to stay for the night. While there, John Grady and Rollins have a conversation about what they believe life in Mexico is like. John Grady recalls what the man said about Mexico. Quote, he made that country sound like the Big Rock Candy Mountains. Said there was lakes and running water and grass to the stirrups, end quote. Big Rock Candy Mountain is a song that describes the ideal life, a life of no responsibilities or consequences for actions. This is exactly the kind of life that John Grady wants and dreams of and hopes to find while in Mexico.
In the second chapter of All the Pretty Horses, we are presented with John Grady and Roland's life in Mexico once they arrived to the Hacienda de Nuestra Señora de la Purísima Concepción. Ranging at a size of 11,000 hectares, this place had become John Grady's vision of a dream come true. His well-known dream of wanting to live a free life, where he could be with all the pretty horses and not having to worry about a single thing, has come to reach a reality in this place. Or so he thought. Everything was perfectly fine. He got to be Don Hector's right-hand man, the one in charge of his horse breeding program. He slept in the horse cabins, and life was going extremely well for him. He even got to be with Don Hector's beautiful daughter, Alejandra. Though John Grady and Alejandra's relationship was not accepted. Little by little, the two of them started to become very close, and at one point, even physical. As time went on, John Grady's feelings increased dramatically, always dreaming and wishing that Alejandra could be his. Even though he does not admit it, he daydreams about her. He even knows what makes her smile, and that had been his intent to make her smile. As we reach the end of this chapter, things start to turn downhill for John Grady. His once brand new paradise of getting all the privileges from Don Hector suddenly comes to a halt when he was arrested in the middle of the night by soldiers. He had no idea that much of it had to do with his scandal with Alejandra. Thus, his once fulfilled paradise in Mexico has now vanished.
In the beginning of Chapter 3, John Grady and Rollins are held captive and taken towards Encantada. Once the two get thrown inside the Encantada jail, they find Blevins and figure out how he gets into jail. After the conversation ends, they go to sleep and John Grady has a dream. His dream is about one of the things he finds meaning in, horses. He dreams of horses in a field on a high plain where the spring rains had brought up the grasses and the wildflowers. In his dream, John Grady joins the horses racing as he is also a horse. John Grady's dream describes his paradise, which is being surrounded by horses. His dream is what he thought Mexico was going to be like. He thought that in Mexico, he could ride his horses freely, but it never turned out that way. McCarthy implements the vivid imagery in his dream, as it gives a close connection to what Grady could have become. He was a horse in his dream, an animal that could roam anywhere without any consequences. John Grady wants to be a horse in real life so he can face no trouble and just live. Now, it seems, after spending time in Mexico, and since he is in jail, his dream has turned into a nightmare.
Chapter 4 and its content wraps up the entire mess that occurred in Mexico and brings the story and its characters' actions to an end. As John Grady makes his way back to Aunt Alfonso on the ranch, he begins to doze off in the grass, first thinking of Blevins. John Grady dreamt of Blevins a night before in the jail and, quote, they talked of what it was like to be dead, end quote. As he also lay there, he thought of Alejandra, but it was nothing more than a brief image of her. However, as he fell asleep, he, quote, dreamt of nothing at all, end quote. John Grady's inability to dream represents his instability and lack of knowledge of what is going on around him and what will happen to him next. A rather odd series of events occurred in which he was lucky to be alive, thus, his loss of the ability to dream is his cry for help. He is lost, struggling to find the meaning he once had and sought after. Through this dream that isn't even a dream, we see that John Grady's utopia has slipped away. Later on, after John Grady has talked to the aunt and left the ranch, he arranges one last meeting with Alejandra where he attempts to convince her to marry him. Amongst his failed attempts, Alejandra tells John Grady, quote, I saw you dead in a dream, end quote. This shows not only the power of death, but more importantly, the power of the dream and how people may parallel and experience it as a reality. Alejandra made a promise to her aunt in order to save John Grady's life from death in prison because she could not bear to think the image from her dream could and would come true. It is no coincidence that Cormac McCarthy uses the imagery and effects of a dream to display the promise that Alejandra made in order to save John Grady's life in exchange to never see him again. As she leaves to never be seen again, John Grady, quote, watched her go as if he himself were in some dream, end quote. As she leaves, John Grady is so upset that he can barely tell whether what is happening is actually happening. He dreamt so long to be with her forever that the only way he can cope with not being with her is creating a dream of everything. But just like every dream, at some point, the person will open their eyes and wake up. As justice is served and John Grady regains his horses and his freedom at the final scenes of the story, his dreams are reassessed. At last, he has a dream again, a dream of what he went to Mexico for, only now he was headed back home. Quote, he dreamt of horses, end quote, which were his motivation and passion that he went to pursue in Mexico. The story ends where it began, with his dream where John Grady has now learned that although there were many obstacles and learned experiences along the way, even love with Alejandra, the key purpose of his journey had returned to his mind and his initial dream was left unchanged.